There are two words we all love to hear. Quitting time. Who doesn't want to clock out early if they can? Most of us certainly would sneak away if we could, including MLB umpires? Possibly. Rumors have swirled for decades that the boys in blue will expand the strike zone during a blowout so they can knock off ahead of schedule. But is that legend true? Do MLB umpires revise the strike zone so they can hit the showers a little earlier? Is that even in any way a factual thing? We know so much more about umpire performance today based on the same kind of data we use to evaluate players. Sites like Ump Scorecards post very detailed metrics of home plate umps after each game, meaning similar percentiles that fans analyze on Baseball Savant also apply to umpires. We know who's more fair, who chokes under pressure, who misses too many pitches too often. We have the data. But can the data adequately address this myth? That's the question we're going to be tackling today. Let's take this first example. Here's a scorecard for David Rackley, who was working the dish during a random Red Sox-Cubs game. First, notice the score. The Bo Sox crushed the Cubs 17-0. If there was ever a blowout, this game fit the bill. The evidence of strike zone expansion should be obvious. In fact, there seems to be a blatant case where Connor Wong was up in the bottom of the 8th. David Rackley is, by any measure, an average umpire, ranking in the 44th percentile for accuracy. And while yes, he's in the 10th percentile in consistency, this just means he misses a good number of pitches, but never the same way. His strike zone may shift around a little bit, except for in the late innings, when the game's on the line. You see, in high leverage situations, Rackley is one of the game's best, in the 98th percentile for accuracy. Wong quickly went up 2-0 in the count. 1 out, runners on first and second. An umpire looking to make an early dinner reservation would bend over backwards to expand the strike zone. After all, if Wong were to get on, its bases loaded, the merry-go-round might start again, and 11-0 could become even more lopsided. The 2-0 pitch comes in high and tight, an obvious ball, not really at all borderline. Pitching is infielder Matt Mervis. But that shouldn't make a difference, should it? A ball is a ball is a ball, no matter what. Rackley, though, calls this pitch a strike, making the count 2-1. Aha, you shout, he did that to hurry the game along. And this would be no rare phenomenon in sports, right? Basketball teams have garbage time during which seemingly no fouls are called, the NFL has its QBs take a knee and no flags are thrown, but when MLB has blowout games, umps are still supposed to adhere to the age-old declaration that baseball has no clock, that teams can theoretically come back from any deficit at any point in the game before the 27th out. And there are precedents. On August 5, 2001, Cleveland got down by 12 runs to the Mariners, and yet ended up winning the game 15-14 in 11 innings, aided by 5 runs being played in the 9th with 2 outs. In fact, 2 other teams in MLB history have also come back after being down by 12. 15 years later, in 2016, the Mariners stormed back from 10 runs down to beat the Padres, serving as the last time a team came back from being down 10 runs. Last season, 3 teams won after being down 8 runs. This kind of thrill can't happen with a play clock. At some point, the math stops working, and the starters get pulled. So, was Rackley being biased because of the situation? On that pitch to Wong? Possibly. But in the top of the 9th, with the Cubs batting and trailing by 17, Rackley missed another pitch. This time, though, he did the opposite. He called a pitch that was a strike, a ball. An umpire looking to get away quickly would never do that. All borderline pitches would be strikes, right? But that's how Rackley handled it, even with another position player pitching. What exactly is going on? Has a baseball legend become ancient history? Has the drive for more data analysis changed the way umpires do their jobs, especially in the later innings of meaningless games? Or has little really shifted at all? But before we dive into individual examples, we first need to talk about the life of an MLB umpire. Now, for some context, if you get drafted as a player, you have roughly around a 17.2% chance of ever appearing on a big league roster, more or less 1 out of 6 odds. If you make it as a minor league umpire, you have a 3% chance of appearing as an MLB umpire, which converts to roughly 1 in 33. It's basically 5 times harder to become an MLB ump than a player. If you even manage to break in, you'll get paid an average of $235,000 per year, which you can supplement with postseason games, camps, and speeches. As such, some umps can earn over $400,000 per year, or about half the minimum MLB player salary. By far the hardest part of the job is when an ump is behind the plate, starting with the equipment, in which the dog days of summer can cause umps to cramp up or experience heat-related illness, while also having to deal with the same foul balls that can roam off of catchers and cause concussions. Just last year, Nick Marley was taken off the field in a stretcher, and Dale Scott, once one of the best in the biz, retired at the age of 58 because of repeated concussions. From a mental standpoint, home plate umpires have a lot to do. They have to make about 120 to 150 unique decisions every single game, calling balls and strikes on pitches that sweep, dive, break, and dart at speeds in excess of 100 miles per hour. Keep in mind the rest of the pitches of the game are either put in play or fouled off. With all that being said, it would make sense, right, if some umpires would take some pitches off. It's a grueling job, and the late innings of a contest long since decided certainly don't seem to beckon for the most rigid adherences to the normally pretty high standards. But certainly this would be the case for the gold standard of MLB umps, right? After all, how would their own averages shake out if they did things like that? This brings us to Derek Thomas. Last season, Thomas ranked in the 100th percentile for accuracy, expected accuracy, and consistency among MLB umps. To put it simply, no one was better. So, explain this. Thomas on this night was horrible behind the plate in comparison to his usual excellence, missing 13 pitches when he might miss 2 or 3 on any given night. He called 9 different pitches strikes that were clearly out of the zone. It doesn't seem possible that the game's best would be this far off, until you notice the final score. Atlanta 15, Cincinnati 3. A blowout. A blowout that perhaps Thomas wasn't in the mood to swelter through, because he kept calling balls strikes. From a statistical standpoint, the most reasonable explanation was that he did it on purpose. Let's look at the game he'd called just prior. There is the real Derek Thomas. He missed 4 pitches all night, and none involved calling balls strikes. He had no real impactful bias for either team, and he showed why he's considered one of the game's best. A close game and a pennant race with a lot riding on the outcome. Of note worth mentioning here is that in high leverage situations, oddly, Thomas ranked in the 34th percentile last season, by far his worst showing of any of his percentiles. He even missed a crucial 3-2 pitch in the bottom of the 3rd inning of the game we were just talking about, which put a runner on. In an eventual 2-run game, this could have been devastating. So, yeah, even the best make mistakes at any given time, but it still can't be ignored that about 3 times less were made in the close contest versus the blowout. So, what might be the cause of an umpire's waning focus as a blowout drones on? Well, let's consider the mental stamina it takes to be an umpire behind the plate. The average person makes about 35,000 decisions each day, so there's no way we can pay close attention to all of them. Obviously, some decisions weigh more than others because the stakes are higher. What you wear to work ranks lower in importance than whether you should hire candidate A or B. Decision fatigue creeps in when people are faced with a series of decisions that increase in leverage. For example, in an emergency room, or the cubicle of a financial planner, where mistakes can lead to lost lives or lost money. The issue is, the more decisions a person has to make over a period of time, under stress, the more likely those decisions will become suboptimal. There seems to be a fixed amount of attention a person can muster, and big decisions can deplete that stock. This brings us back to umpires. One recent study used the data from 26,523 MLB games, played between 2008 and 2018, which involved over 3 million umpire decisions. What the study rejected was the idea that umpires called the game the same no matter the inning, the teams playing, or the score. The authors wrote, "We find that umpires adjust the attention paid to a decision in response to the importance of the decision all the time." In other words, because attention is a resource that can be used up, umpires might practice something called strategic inattention in order to save their best focus for the biggest moments in the game. In a blowout, each pitch will have a leverage close to 0. There's nothing riding on the call. But let's say the visiting team is down 5-2 in the top of the 9th inning. They have bases loaded, none out, and the count is 0-2. What would the leverage of that pitch be? How much would the game's outcome swing if the umpire missed the call? Turns out, this is a 99th percentile scenario, one of the most impactful in a baseball game, and the leverage would be around 0.08. For reference, the average leverage for any MLB pitch is 0.014. The data also goes on to show that as the leverage of a situation increases, umpires grow more accurate, by an average of 0.61%. Doesn't seem like much, but it's the same as increasing a 50th percentile ump all the way up to a 73rd. What was also found is that between innings 1 and 8, umpires remain very consistent, maintaining an error rate of around 0.05 to 0.1% above the mean. There's no real pattern, just a narrow band of performance that's quite stable, until you reach the 9th inning, where leverage can increase. But by then, the increase in leverage and decision fatigue take over, and umpires become less accurate by a staggering 0.39%. No, it's not you or your biased memory. Umpires are in fact worse in the 9th inning than any other, especially in contests with the lowest leverage, where 0 is riding on each pitch and they're already exhausted from the previous 2 to 3 hours of game calling. Of course they're going to be more inaccurate, even more inaccurate than anything they found in the study. So, let's think about David Rackley and Derek Thomas once more. Rackley seems to be an umpire who doesn't really lock in until the game is in full bloom. Then he becomes one of the best. He seems to be saving himself up for these moments when he needs all of his attention. Thomas, though, doesn't really ump that way. He's all in, all game, but this also means that as the game wears on, even if it becomes super tight, he gets fatigued and starts missing pitches in a way that he usually never does. It's like he's used his attentional focus in low-stakes situations, and when he's faced with a big moment, he can, at times, run out of steam. It goes to show the difference umpire to umpire and the difficulty in discerning any real pattern. With all this being said, what about the absolute least amount of leverage possible? When a position player pitcher is in, Last season, MLB hitters had a WOBA of .433, or roughly the equivalent of Juan Soto, when facing these position players. It's not a good look. Perhaps it's understandable then that in these situations, umpires might not be at their most astute. Let's take a look at one such game, a 13-0 rout with the Rays crushing the Jays. The game was fairly close until the 7th when the Rays went up 12-0. DJ Rayburn, accordingly, checked out, calling way too many balls he saw strikes, hurrying the game along as he went. But again, not all umpires do the same. In a game towards the end of the season between the Dodgers and the Rockies, umpire Ryan Wills could have seen the score, a 13-2 Dodgers romp, and just made anything near the plate a strike. Heading into the 8th inning, the Dodgers were up 8-2. Then they piled on, turning it into a laugher. But Wills never changed his basic approach, no matter how far ahead the Dodgers got. Only twice did he call an obvious ball a strike. He turned in one of his strongest performances of the year, when he really didn't need to. But a week before, the Dodgers blew out the Marlins by an even more lopsided score, 20-4. And home plate umpire Dan Iasonia did what many fans would expect. He hurried the game along by calling balls strikes, even if they weren't really close. He ended up missing 14 pitches, more than double what Willis had muffed in a similar game. Normally, Iasonia is one of the best high-leverage umpires in the game, in the 76th percentile. He's exactly the kind of ump who improves when stakes get raised, but then checks out during a rout. Wills, on the other hand, is a more accurate umpire than Iasonia, but not in high-leverage situations, where he's in the 26th percentile, much like Thomas. So he can call pitches correctly throughout the game until attention starts to build and his fatigue sets in. Now, what about an outright bad umpire? How do the worst umps in the game handle a blowout? Well, about as bad as you'd expect. In September, the Yankees battered the A's 10-0 in about as classic a blowout as exists in the game. Behind the plate was Laz Diaz, who was among the most inaccurate in the 7th percentile, least consistent in the 10th percentile, and least impartial in the 21st percentile for favorability. In high leverage moments, he sits in the bottom quintile. Basically, he's awful in every regard. During a rout, Laz Diaz did this. He had an average game for him for a below average umpire. He missed 11 pitches and really wasn't consistent. He had more trouble calling strikes than balls. Since it was a blowout, no one pitch really had any leverage, so the stakes stayed low. But did he expand the zone beyond his normal standards? It doesn't really look like it. But does he even know the zone intimately? That's perhaps a better question. Laz Diaz has such mediocre stats that it's impossible to discern any real pattern, in either a negative or positive way. So, what have we learned today? We know that umpires can be prone to bouts of inattention, as there's simply no doubt that this happens, and we've presented proof of it. But it doesn't happen every time, in a specific way, or anything close to it. To even make it as an MLB ump takes more diligence and resilience than most people possess. Umps might look like our neighbors, but their psychological profiles are vastly different. Most are highly driven and highly trained. Getting calls wrong in any circumstance will surely bother most MLB umps, regardless of the score. That's how they were trained, that's how they even made it to the bigs. But they are human, and humans seem to have a finite supply of attention on any given day. As the game goes on, they get tired, and when the pressure mounts, that's when they try their most to lock in. And of course, inversely, when pressure wanes, a leakage of refinement can soon follow. So, what's the final answer? Do umpires intentionally expand the zone and blow out games? I, for one, am inclined to lean towards no, though they do get increasingly more inaccurate overall, due in large part to an extensive workload game after game that increases their likelihood of a waning focus in a meaningless contest. They aren't deciding to be biased in any direction, and any narrative as such is probably one we're building up in our own minds. After all, the poorly called strike that moves the game along in a blowout would always get more attention than the poorly called ball that stalls it. Right? Anyway, I hope I've managed to shed a little light on this subject, or at least keep you entertained for a little while. In that vein, thank you so much for watching. Please check out this playlist for other essay content just like this, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.